Hi, I'm Michael Harding. I'm here to talk about my oil colours and my journey as a paint maker. I began making oil colours simply because I couldn't, from my point of view, to get the paint to behave like the paintings of the old masters. I'd walk into the National Gallery in London, look at a Rembrandt and think, why can't I paint like that? Now, all right, a certain thing called genius was missing, but it didn't take me long to realise that also the materials that I was attempting to paint with bore no resemblance to the materials that the old guys had. So I set about on a quest to try and figure out why. I went back to college, spoke to a tutor of mine, a guy called Graham Beeching. Graham was one of these knowledgeable go-to sort of boffin lecturers he knew everything. And he nonchalantly just said these words, Michael, you have to remember, at one time, artists used to all make their own paint. And at that point, a little light went on in my head. And I thought to myself, well, if they can do it, I can do it. My scale of production was extremely small, in fact, almost laughable. And believe it or not, I functioned out of my bedroom, which was also my studio. And you're probably starting to get a picture in your head of how terrible this can be, and you're absolutely right. I had a wardrobe. I tipped on its side, so it was about the right height. It became my workbench. And in those days, I could probably produce about 2 or 3 tubes an hour by hand grinding. Of course, it wasn't long before I sort of scaled up slightly and invested in a very small little grinding machine, a little machine called a triple roll mill, which allowed me to probably increase my mass production to probably about 5 or 6 tubes an hour. I think you get the picture. And friends started saying, look, you've got to supply us paint. And so I found myself pushed into business. I decided I'd try and put a business hat on, and I was thinking, well, I have to have a name for this venture. And because I was in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, I decided to call the company Tunbridge Wells Artist Paints. And that was around for about 2 years. And believe it or not, in those days, I didn't even have the money to pay for labels to be pre-printed. So I used to make my own labels with the John Ball printing set. Some of you might remember the little rubber things that you'd put into the sort of the slots, and so I had to change all those for every time I had a new colour. And of course my output was probably about 6 tubes a session, so it was very, very small anyway. A friend then said to me, well, people now, because you're getting a bit of a following, they won't, the name Tunbridge Wells won't mean anything to them, so I think you should call it something else. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, in honesty, to call it by my own name, it says something, because it means that I actually stand by it, and I do. When artists trust me enough to use my paints in their paintings, something that is most dear to them and most important to them, they're trusting me. And so I think as a matter of almost decency, I should put my name by it, as if I'm endorsing what I do. Because I literally do stand by every tube, and it's from a quality control point of view, it's so important. And I think few businesses have that nowadays. So I think it's one of the best decisions I ever made to put my own name on the tube. Of course, I had to have the go-to colours, the cadmiums, the ultramarines. In those days, I didn't have the reach or the leads as to where to get the exotic things like the vermilions and the lapis from. So I would just go for the standard palette stuff, and fortunately, those pigments generally are still available to this day. One doesn't realise that when you attempt to start a business or run a business, even if you've got a fantastic product, you have to learn actually to have a business. And even if you're an artist selling your paintings, you are in business. And we all know that that can be very, very lonely at times. And we've been making paint now, or I've been making paint now probably for the best part of 40 years. And I cannot even start to catalogue the mistakes I've made along the way, and things happen and things go wrong and things go right, and suppliers can let you down, and strange things come along. And not surprisingly, particularly when you're short of money and you're trying to sort of get something going. And I remember a very, very strange thing happened back in 1995. I'd stopped and started the business a couple of times. This time I was back in London, and I was back with a vengeance, and I was going to make a go of this endeavour of mine. And I had the little paint making machine, the little first triple roll machine, and it started to break down, so I had to find a replacement for it. And in those days, I didn't really know the industry terribly well, and I didn't know where these machines particularly came from. And so I searched high and low, and eventually I found one of these little machines in the north of England, up in Manchester, and it was being used to make leather dyes, which of course is another thing they can be used for. So I found this dealer and I said to him, "How much do you want for this machine?" And he said, £2,750. And I just thought, oh dear, that's probably going to break the bank quite literally for me. I went home that night and I literally went through empty pockets, saw what I had left in the bank account, loose change here and there, and I calculated that I could pay for the machine. So I called him up the next day and said to him, "I'll have that machine." And he said, "Okay, Mr. Harding, if you can send me a cheque for £2,750, I'll put your name on it." This was Wednesday. On the following Saturday, I played the National Lottery, and a very strange thing happened. As I said, the machine was £2,750. I got 5 numbers and I won £2,722. All but £28. I often joke and say, why didn't I win that final £28? But I remember when my accountant saw it in my bookkeeping that here was the purchase of the machine dated, and then 3 days later was the money from Camelot. And he just jokingly said, "You expect the taxman to believe this?" And I just said, "Harry, it's what happened. I went out, purchased the machine, and then I won the money back, all but £28. And you can joke about it and you can have whatever philosophy you liked about it. I often like to think that maybe Mr. Rembrandt and Mr. Titian and Mr. Velasquez were putting strings for me from a very high place. People often ask me what sort of paintings I do myself, and I think a lot of people are also surprised by the fact I am actually a functioning artist. And I'm actually very proud of the fact that as an artist paint maker and the owner of a paint making company, I'm still the guy who's hands-on, getting my hands dirty. I am a figurative painter. I love painting landscapes and portraits. That's my main love. And I just am still overwhelmed with nature's beauty. My own personal mission, if you like, is I want to try and convey my almost shock and appreciation for beauty. It could be a dramatic light effect. It could be a beautiful blue sky. And when I was a younger artist, I used to care what people thought of me as an artist. And then I got to the point where, it doesn't matter. As long as you're enjoying and it's getting something out, that it doesn't matter what other people think. And that was a big hurdle for me to overcome. And when I paint as well, I'll be absolutely honest with you, sometimes I get a combination of colours out and I'll think, my goodness, now I know what they're going on about, because I still get a buzz from painting with my own materials, and it really, of course he would say that, wouldn't he? But there's a thing where when I'm painting away and I enjoy the product, I still have a wow factor like it's that first day. Sometimes when I'm painting, I find myself returning to certain, I suppose what we'd all call go-to colours. And it might surprise some of you to know that there are 1 or 2 colours within my range that generally as an artist I've looked at over the years and thought, I don't like those guys. But a very strange thing happened last year, that I was painting away and I was using a colour which, when I look at individually as a colour, like when I play around and demonstrate, it's absolutely beautiful. But when I thought of what context could I have it within my painting and keep control of it, and that was phthalocyanine blue, I just thought, yeah, beautiful from a colour maker's point of view, but what on earth can I do with it as an artist? I found out that this was a recurring thing again and again. It was my go-to blue. And I then found that I was actually making up paintings around it. And there's a painting of Mount Snowdonia Mountain, that the shadows of it were so intoxicating, and I found that the blue itself, because any of you have painted with those phthalocyanine colours, the blue and the green, you know that they can creep everywhere, and that can be a bit of a danger. But for me, I made the painting about that intoxication and how that blue was in everything, and surprise, surprise for me, it's been one of my most successful paintings, I think. It's always a bit of a dangerous thing when you start liking your own work, though, isn't it? As we all know. It's suspect, because you start to realise, you start to wonder, like, well, is it wrong that I'm liking it? Is it something that in 2 years' time I'm going to be so embarrassed by that I want to destroy it? But interestingly, it's still a milestone work. Of course, I talk a lot about Rembrandt, and Yes, of course, I'd love to probably give him a tube of my stacked lead white. But in a sense, the reaction I'd be looking for him would probably be nonchalance rather than surprise, because I'd want him to go, well, yeah, of course, this is my standard white. Why did you give me this? Because then it's confirmation. On the other hand, of course, if I gave him something modern that's got a bit more poke your eye out, he would probably go, I can't work with this, it's too extreme. He might not. He might go, oh my goodness, I wish we had these in my day. And I think it's something I often debate, because when you look at, I think Monet would enjoy working with all the modern colours we have. But I don't think the classical artist probably would. I think it's just too extreme. It'd be a bit like giving Mozart an electric guitar or something. It doesn't have the harmony that he'd be after. Could be wrong. But I don't think he'd like the modern stuff. I think he'd see it as unnecessary, and he'd rightly would point at his paintings and go, why do you need all this when you can do it with the modest palette I had? Because when you look at the dramas of his works, take the Night Watch, you don't look at the Night Watch and think, oh, those poor guys in those days, they only had 7 or 8 colours to choose from. It looks like they've got every bit of the choice that we have today, which I find is quite interesting.